Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
Red Hawk, an Oglala warrior photographed in the Badlands of South Dakota around 1905. Mounted on his horse on the arid lands left to his people, Red Hawk represents a generation that lived through the violent transition between freedom and confinement on reservations. The Oglala were plains warriors, masters of mounted combat. 4 women pose armed at Camp Hope around 1890. Long dresses, elaborate hats, and rifles show that camping in the West required more than symbolic courage. You had to know how to shoot, cook, build shelter, and defend yourself. Far from towns, women also faced loneliness, wild animals, and dangerous men. Old Man Topping poses beside the first log cabin built in Cripple Creek around 1891. This rudimentary structure marks the beginning of settlement in the area that would become one of the largest gold mining districts in Colorado. Topping was among the first to arrive, when Cripple Creek was nothing more than a few tents in the middle of the mountains. The home of Jesse James's family in Kearney, Missouri, photographed in 1877. It was here that Union militiamen beat Jesse while he was still a teenager, hanged his stepfather, and burned neighboring properties. Years later, Pinkerton agents threw a bomb into the house. The attack killed Archie, his half-brother, and tore off the right hand of his mother, Zerelda. Cherokee Bill, real name Crawford Goldsby, poses with his captors during a train stop in Nowata around 1895. Goldsby was of Cherokee, African, and white ancestry, and became one of the most feared criminals in Indian Territory, accused of multiple murders, including that of an innocent man during a train robbery. He was captured, tried, and hanged at age 20. 4 conspirators in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln are executed in 1865 before a silent crowd. The gallows were built inside the prison complex, with soldiers lined along the tops of the walls to contain any reaction. Mary Surratt became the first woman executed by the federal government. The public execution marked the symbolic end of the Civil War and made it clear that the state would demand exemplary punishment from anyone who threatened the newly reunified power. A hunter guides a canoe loaded with furs beside his dogs in Alaska around 1900. The furs guaranteed income, the dogs guaranteed life. They pulled sleds, warned of danger, and helped in the hunt. Isolated for months, men like this depended on every animal taken to face extreme cold and the long winter that turned simple mistakes into a death sentence. Irwin E. Smith serves morning coffee at the OR Ranch, Arizona. But Smith was not an ordinary cowboy. He was a photographer. Between 1895 and 1915, he documented the real life of American cowboys, living and working alongside them. His photographs preserved a way of life that was disappearing. A cowboy riding a moose on the main street of Sheridan, Wyoming around 1910. The photo is real. In towns of the American West, displays of control over wild animals were common, a mix of entertainment and competition among cowboys. Moose are extremely difficult to handle, temperamental and strong. Managing to ride one and keep it calm long enough for a photograph was a rare feat. Cowboys lasso a gray wolf during the roundup in Wyoming, 1887. The animal is immobilized, captured. Wolves were serious predators for cattle ranchers. Estimates indicate they killed thousands of head per year on the Great Plains. Cowboys dealt with the threat directly: ropes, teamwork, and elimination. This photo records the moment after the successful capture. Red Cloud and American Horse, 2 Lakota leaders photographed in 1891. Red Cloud led Red Cloud's war between 1866 and 1868, becoming one of the only native leaders to force the American government to sign a treaty on his terms. American Horse was a leader during the Sioux Wars. Here, decades after the conflicts, they wore clothing that symbolizes the forced assimilation of their peoples. April 29th, 1896. Bennett Avenue, the main artery of Cripple Creek, is on fire. The Great Cripple Creek Fire began around midday and destroyed much of the commercial district. Wooden buildings fed the fire quickly. The town was young, thrown together in a hurry during the gold rush of the 1890s. Within a few hours, dozens of businesses turned to ashes. And this is Cripple Creek after the Great Fire. Entire blocks reduced to smoking wreckage, but the town rebuilt with astonishing speed. There was too much gold in the district to simply abandon everything. In the reconstruction, they replaced wood with brick and stone. Less than 4 days after the fire, they were already starting to raise new buildings. The gold fever was stronger than any disaster. August 2nd, 1876. Wild Bill Hickok plays cards in Saloon Number 10 when Jack McCall approaches from behind and shoots him in the head at point-blank range. Instant death. Hickok was buried twice in Deadwood, first in the southern part of town, then moved in 1879 to Mount Moriah Cemetery. In 1891, a monument with his bust was added. The murder of one of the most famous gunfighters of the West. A Ute man during a hunt in 1899. The Utes were skilled hunters of the Rocky Mountains, depending on game for survival. By the late 19th century, already confined to reservations, they still kept ancestral hunting traditions when allowed. This photo captures a moment from a millennia-old practice that was rapidly disappearing. American expansion into the mountains of Colorado had pushed the Utes into ever smaller territories. Arch Clements, Dave Poole, and Bill Hendricks, veterans of Civil War guerrilla fighting. Clements, on the left, was called Devil's Head and rode with Bloody Bill Anderson. In 1864, he took part in the Centralia Massacre, where Confederate guerrillas executed unarmed Union soldiers. Clements was killed in 1866. These men represented the most brutal side of the Civil War. Settlers flee the Dakota War in 1862. Entire families crowded into wagons, carrying what little they managed to save. The conflict began when the Dakota, facing starvation after years of broken treaties and delayed government payments, attacked settlements in Minnesota. Hundreds of settlers died, thousands fled. S.J. Roberts's cabin, Cripple Creek, 1893. A rudimentary structure of wood, earth, and branches, a typical shelter for prospectors during the Cripple Creek Gold Rush. The region sat more than 9,186 feet above sea level, with brutal winters. Even so, thousands lived in precarious cabins like this while digging for fortune. Most never found enough gold to get out of there. Martin Chavez and Francisco Santana inside the store in Picacho, New Mexico around 1880. Chavez was an ally of Billy the Kid during the Lincoln County War, a violent conflict between rival factions for control of local trade. His story was forgotten as Billy became a legend. Chavez helped the outlaw and survived the war. Here, years later, he appears as a respectable merchant beside his son-in-law. Interior of the Sawtell Ranch at Henry's Lake, Fremont County, Idaho, 1872. Men gathered around the wood stove, the heart of any frontier home. Canvas and wooden walls offered minimal protection, but for settlers isolated in the mountains, places like the Sawtell Ranch were essential. They offered shelter, food, and human company. Dug into the earth in Randsburg, California, around 1897, this stone and soil house was the home of a prospector. There was not enough wood in the desert, so miners dug directly into the hillsides. Stacked stone walls, a canvas roof, packed earth floor. The California summer heat made the interior suffocating. But for men obsessed with gold, discomfort was just a detail. The worst mass lynching in American history happened here, Los Angeles, 1871. An armed fight between rival Chinese gangs over the possession of a woman triggered racial fury. An enraged mob stormed Chinatown. 19 immigrants were murdered, 15 hanged from lampposts and trees. Alameda Street, the place where violence exploded and destroyed innocent lives. Josephine Sarah Marcus and Wyatt Earp together at their Happy Days mine in the foothills of the Whipple Mountains, Arizona, around 1920. This is one of the rarest photographs of the couple. Decades after the shootouts in Tombstone, Earp lived as a prospector, searching for gold with Josephine. Across the river from Parker, they worked their small claim, far from fame and violence. The legend of the Old West had become a miner. Few would have recognized him. 20 feet. That was the depth of the snow that trapped the Donner Party in the winter of 1846 to 1847. How do we know that? These tree stumps at Alder Creek, photographed in 1866, reveal the exact height. Settlers cut firewood where they could reach at the top of the packed snow. When the snow finally melted, the stumps remained like bizarre markers. John Dunn drinks coffee outdoors in Missoula, Montana, around 1900. Dunn was a carpenter and an amateur photographer, two essential professions in the expanding West. Here he relaxes beside his cabin and laundry wagon. Photographers like Dunn documented the daily life of the frontier, preserving moments that otherwise would have disappeared. Dobson Hotel, Cripple Creek, 1892. They offered basic lodging in one of the mining towns that grew the fastest in Colorado. Cripple Creek went from a few hundred residents in 1890 to nearly 50,000 in a few years. Rustic hotels like the Dobson were essential, providing beds and meals for the constant flood of prospectors arriving in search of gold. 1876, Santa Barbara, California. You would expect paved streets and civilization, right? Wrong. This rough street, looking east at De La Guerra at the corner of Anacapa, shows that even established California towns were still brutally primitive. Weathered adobe buildings, dirt roads, precarious infrastructure, 19th century California was not the golden paradise they sold. It was dust, isolation, and hard work. Wickes, Montana, in December 1886. A mining town in the mountains where men faced brutal winters in search of silver and gold. The main street concentrated saloons, hotels, and commercial businesses. Wickes prospered briefly during the mining boom, but like so many other western towns, its population rose and fell as the mines produced or failed. In winter, the Rocky Mountain cold made life especially harsh. James McCrea's property in Nebraska, near Berwyn, around 1888. The family poses in front of their sod block home, the only building option on the treeless plains. Sod houses were dark, damp, and infested with insects. Snakes and rodents fell from the ceiling, but they provided insulation against the deadly cold of plains winters. The McCrea family, like thousands of settlers, learned to survive on an unforgiving land. November 1866, a floating bridge over the Rio Grande connecting Brownsville, Texas to Matamoros, Mexico. Soldiers of the 114th United States Colored Infantry Regiment patrol the precarious structure. This was one of the few regiments of black soldiers in the American Army after the Civil War. A sandstorm advances over Midland, Texas on February 20th, 1894, late in the afternoon. The thick cloud swallows houses, windmills, and streets in minutes. Storms like this were common on the plains, the result of long droughts and exposed soil from overgrazing. The dust suffocated people, blinded animals, and paralyzed entire towns. For Western settlers, the weather was as deadly as any gunfighter. Celia Ann Mattie Blaylock poses for a portrait in the early 1870s. Wyatt Earp's common-law companion for nearly 8 years, she lived beside him through hard times, gambling, violence, and constant moves across the West. When Earp left her for another woman in 1881, Mattie moved to Pinal City, Arizona. Soon after, she died of an overdose of laudanum mixed with alcohol. The Arizona Club in Las Vegas, around 1907. An elegant saloon, long bar, and live music attracted railroad workers, bettors, and businessmen. Las Vegas was still a young settlement, driven by the arrival of the Union Pacific. Places like this served as social centers where deals were made, fortunes changed hands, and the city began to build a reputation for drinking, gambling, and excess. Tom Horn appears seated in the Laramie County Jail office in Cheyenne in 1902. A former Army scout and hired gun for big cattlemen, Horn was accused of murders committed during range wars in Wyoming and Colorado. Shortly after this photo, he was convicted of the murder of young Willie Nickel and hanged. To this day, it is not known whether he was truly guilty. William F. Cody stages a buffalo hunt for the crowd in his famous Wild West show around 1905. The show mixed entertainment and myth, turning real massacres into performances. Decades earlier, mass hunting had wiped out millions of buffalo, destroying the food base of indigenous peoples. On stage, violence became an attraction, while the real consequence had already been normalized. Two Navajo men look at the ruins of Casablanca in Canyon de Chelly, Arizona, in 1913. The ancestral structures, built centuries earlier by the Anasazi, remained embedded in the canyon walls. For the Navajo, the site was a living part of the landscape and memory. For white photographers and visitors, it symbolized a lost past. A group of Ute men pose for a portrait around 1867. They wear traditional clothing and hold weapons, symbols of autonomy at a time when that autonomy was already being stripped away. A few years later, broken treaties and military pressure would confine the Utes to reservations in Utah and Colorado. Al Jennings poses armed on horseback around 1913. A former lawyer who became an outlaw after train robberies, Jennings served time and came up determined to rewrite his own story. He took advantage of the rise of silent film to sell himself as an authentic bandit acting in movies and giving lectures. His fame came less from his crimes and more from his ability to turn real violence into a profitable narrative. A stagecoach crosses an improvised bridge outside Silverton, Colorado in 1890. Structures like this were thrown together quickly with rough logs to keep the flow of gold, silver, and supplies moving through the mountains. The crossing was risky, bridges collapsed, and falls into ravines were common. Even so, transport did not stop. Isolated by altitude and winter, mining towns depended on these precarious routes to survive. A group of Shoshone men pose in open country around 1868, possibly near Fort Bridger, Wyoming. They were a people accustomed to the nomadic life of plains and mountains, but at that moment, recent treaties had already drastically reduced their lands. A few years later, many would be forced to live on reservations, depending on government supplies to survive. 4 Texas Rangers pose armed in Rio Grande City, Texas in 1887. Created to enforce the law on the frontier, the group operated through patrols, escorts, and direct confrontations. The Rangers faced cattle thieves, smugglers, and border conflicts with Mexico. The line between law enforcement and violence was thin, and many abuses committed in that period permanently shaped the agency's reputation. Seth Kinman appears seated in a chair made from hides and antlers in California in 1865. A mountain hunter, Kinman killed hundreds of bears and moose, turning trophies into extravagant furniture. One of these chairs was sent as a gift to President Andrew Johnson. In the West, displaying slaughtered animals signaled prestige, survival, and dominance over a still wild territory. 2 Apsaluke, the Crow people, on horseback beside a teepee in Montana, 1908. The cold tightened, game grew scarce, and the territory was no longer theirs. Still, they kept moving with the seasons, as they always had. The teepee was taken down, the horses saddled, and life continued between harsh winter and the constant pressure of white expansion. A homesteader woman poses with her guitar in front of a cabin on the Great Plains in the early 20th century. Isolated by miles of open land, many families lived with almost no human contact. Music served as companionship and relief after days of heavy work, constant wind, and absolute silence. A simple cabin, dirt floor, and thin walls did not prevent moments of normal life. A prospector poses in front of his rustic cabin in the mountains of Colorado, in the Pikes Peak region. Isolated among pines and rocks, he lived on long days and uncertain results. The wood stove, worn pots, and scattered tools reveal a hard routine. Many like him spent years digging and never got rich, trapped between the hope of the next vein and the impossibility of going home. Myers Avenue, Cripple Creek, 1892. This street would become the infamous red light district. Saloons, gambling houses, and brothels operated here, serving thousands of miners. Myers Avenue concentrated the darkest side of the gold rush: prostitution, gambling, drinking, and violence. For many men who worked in the mines, it was where they spent everything they earned in a single night. A hunter sits in the middle of the forest, surrounded by his beagles around 1901. Waiting for deer was part of the routine, demanding silence, patience, and well-trained dogs. The beagles tracked scent for hours through trunks and wet leaves. For many rural men, hunting was not a sport, but an essential supplement of food, income, and identity. A crowd gathers in Leadville, Colorado in 1881 to watch the double hanging of 2 murderers. About 10,000 people surround the site, turning the execution into a public event. In mining towns, punishment served as spectacle and warning. Justice was fast, exemplary, and final. For some, watching confirmed order. For others, it was simply another form of entertainment. 2 women talk on Cutler Street in Helena, Montana. The town was growing fast because of gold, but daily life remained hard. Women shared news, warnings, and mutual support while their husbands worked in the mines. The Eastern Orthodox Christian Chapel at Fort Ross stands isolated north of San Francisco in 1867. Built by Russian settlers, it served as a spiritual center in the middle of a distant and vulnerable outpost. Orthodoxy had reached America decades earlier, coming from Alaska by canoe. Even after the Russian withdrawal from California, the chapel remained. The Hood family poses in Calabasas, California in 1915, staging a fake robbery beside their wagon. Hands raised, a rifle aimed, all done as a joke. Guns were already part of daily life and popular imagination, fueled by stories and Old West films. A wooden improvised jail in Wyoming Territory in 1893. crooked boards, a small opening like a window, and an armed guard outside. In many frontier towns, this was the entire penal system. There were no secure cells, permanent judges, or long trials. The law was fragile and temporary. Pawnee people sit inside a teepee in Oklahoma in 1889. By that time, the Pawnee had already been forcibly removed from much of their ancestral lands in Nebraska. A white boy appears among his Apache captors, photographed in Arizona Territory at the end of the 19th century. He is Jimmy McKinn, kidnapped at age 11 during frontier conflicts. He lived long enough among the Apache to learn the language, the customs, and form real bonds. When he was rescued and returned to his family, he cried and resisted, saying he wanted to stay. Men gather outside a rudimentary ranch to play poker in the American West in the late 19th century. For isolated workers, the game was more than entertainment. It was a way to socialize, ease loneliness, and sometimes win in cards what the land refused to provide. A family poses together in New Mexico around 1895. In the middle of them, an Indigenous woman holds a baby, probably as a servant. For many Native people of the Southwest, work in white households replaced the life lost on taken lands. She joins the daily routine, cares for children, and sustains the household, but occupies a silent place, defined by dependence, little choice, and forced adaptation. A pagan warrior holds a coup stick in the late 19th century. Among the Plains peoples, counting coup was a form of prestige, getting close to the enemy in battle and touching him without killing him. The stick symbolized courage, self-control, and superior skill. Eagle feathers marked deeds recorded throughout a lifetime. More than a weapon, the coup stick was public proof of honor earned in the face of death. Henry B. Carrington poses with officials at the site of the Fetterman Massacre in Wyoming during a visit in 1908. 42 years earlier, 81 United States Army soldiers died there in an ambush led by Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. The raised flag turns the battlefield into an official memorial, reinterpreting a military defeat as an episode of national honor. Chaitapa appears seated on the left, photographed after leading the Osage in the Cutthroat Gap confrontation in the late 19th century. The photo brings tense worlds together: the Indigenous leader, white officers, and intermediaries. Chaitapa negotiated while defending territory and autonomy under growing pressure. The portrait records at the moment when diplomacy, coercion, and survival walked side by side on the frontier. Man afraid of his horses, a Lakota chief, smokes a ceremonial pipe during negotiations for the Fort Laramie Treaty in 1868. Yes, that is his name. Many Indigenous names were translated literally, hastily, or incorrectly by white interpreters, losing spiritual and cultural meaning. For the Lakota, names changed over lifetime and carried deeds, visions, and respect, not fixed labels. A family lives in an improvised cabin in Oklahoma Territory at the end of the 19th century. The roof is made of branches and earth, the floor is packed dirt, and cattle share the space around the house. For many poor settlers, the routine mixed heavy work, constant scarcity, and daily adaptation. Survival depended on what the land allowed and how much the body could endure, with no guarantee of improvement or safety. A stagecoach on the main street of Cripple Creek, around 1895. Passenger and freight transport by stagecoach was essential in mining towns. These carriages, pulled by multiple horses, connected Cripple Creek to neighboring towns and to the railroad. Long trips were uncomfortable and dangerous. Robberies were common. But for those with gold in their pockets and urgency to leave the mountains, paying the fare was worth every cent. Men sit in an improvised bathhouse in Arkansas in 1892, built over the hot springs that would give rise to Hot Springs National Park. Simple benches, hot water running with no luxury at all. Long before that, Native peoples called the region the Valley of the Vapors and treated it as a sacred place of healing. With the arrival of settlers, the spiritual space became business and paid rest. Hell's Half Acre, the red light district of Fort Worth, Texas. Lights on, men crowded on the sidewalks, and women at the doorways of businesses. The area concentrated saloons, brothels, and gambling houses, operating day and night. Authorities tolerated it because money moved fast. Violence, alcohol, and exploitation coexisted as an accepted part of the urban economy, while the city pretended to keep order just beyond the corner. View of Creede, Colorado, in November 1893. The town spreads through the valley surrounded by cliffs and pines covered by the cold of early winter. Creed exploded with the discovery of silver, drawing thousands in just a few months. Streets, houses, and saloons rose too fast to last. When the ore ran out, many left as quickly as they arrived. 3 cattle thieves pose armed in New Mexico in the 1870s, worn hats, revolvers, and rifles. Cattle rustling was common in regions where fences were rare and the law was distant. Many crossed territories switching brands, reselling animals, and surviving among isolated ranches. For these men, crime was their profession. Lakota, captured after the Battle of Slim Buttes in South Dakota in 1876. Seated in front of a teepee, they appear under guard after a confrontation tied to the military campaigns that followed Little Bighorn. Many were women and children, taken as prisoners to force surrender and break resistance. A blind woman poses for a portrait in Harris County, Texas, around 1870. In the West, disabilities rarely came with medical or social support. Blind people depended on family, whatever domestic work was possible, and daily adaptation. Navajo dancers take part in the Yibichai ceremony, also called Ye-Bi-Che, around 1900. The masks, body paint, and movements follow ancient rituals tied to healing and spiritual balance. In a time of strong cultural repression, these ceremonies continued to be practiced, often far from the eyes of authorities. The completion of the first transcontinental railroad in 1869 united the country and propelled the Old West. Chinese workers faced extreme conditions to build tunnels in the mountains. The railroad reduced travel from months to days, facilitating trade and cattle transport and also accelerating conflicts with indigenous tribes as it expanded territories. Saloon gamblers gathered around a table in Eureka, South Dakota. In mining towns, gambling was pastime and livelihood, where wages changed hands in a night. Winning meant food and shelter. Losing could bind a man to debt, violence, or the next hand. The Can-Can restaurant in Tombstone, Arizona, around 1880. Lined-up tables, white tablecloths, and apron-wearing waiters contrast with the town's violent reputation. Tombstone was a silver mining hub filled with gunfighters, gamblers, and prostitutes. Businesses like the Can-Can offered hot meals and a bit of order amid daily chaos, serving miners, sheriffs, and outlaws under the same roof. On the ranch, you cut your hair with a knife. This 1908 photo shows the brutal reality of life on the American frontier. Everything was improvised. Cowboys spent months isolated caring for cattle, far from any town or barber. When hair grew too long under the hat, the solution was simple and dangerous: a trusted partner and a sharp knife. J.L. Niebergall, dealer in men's furnishings, boots, and shoes in a Cripple Creek, 1890s. Businesses like this thrived in mining towns. Thousands of men worked in the region's gold mines and needed durable gear. Sturdy boots, heavy clothing, basic furnishings. Niebergall set up his business in a simple wooden building, typical of the rushed architecture of gold rush towns.